A Microcosm of Transition. With the work in the summer of 2013, 12 excavation seasons are complete on the Northeast Insula project at Hippos of the Decapolis. The excavation area of the project is delineated by the orthogonal grid on which Hippos is organized. The Decumanus Maximus of Hippos shows evidence of 1st century construction. It is reasonable to presume that bisecting cardines followed in close succession as the city flourished in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. The project is subdivided by 3 of these narrow cardines into the 3 excavation zones within the project. Within each zone is a significant representative of the transitions at the site from Greco-Roman to Byzantine to Umayyad. At the north end of the eastern zone is a Roman peristyle house, the House of Tyche. The northeast church, representing the Byzantine period, is the most prominent feature of the central zone. The western zone has several building complexes that are labeled with Greek letters from south to north. Complexes Alpha and Beta have structures dating to the early Umayyad period that were apparently abandoned prior to the earthquake in the mid-8th century. This paper will discuss these representative elements that illustrate the transitions impacting Hippos the Decapolis during its primary period of occupation. This paper will take up in order the House of Tyche, the Northeast Church, and the Umayyad building complexes. The House of Tyche. A peristyle house is located at the north end of the eastern zone. Portions of the southern section of the house, a peristyle court next to the western wall, 2 rooms to the east, and the southern section of a garden to the north of the house have been excavated. The southern section of the home has both domestic and storage functions. In and near a small cubiculum, we recovered a crossbow fibula, 2 glass bottles, a glass lamp or beaker, a bone-carved maenad, a scarab, a glass ring, and a bronze pitcher with an iron handle. Some of these finds are luxury items. In a neighboring storage room, on the hard-packed floor, was a heavy deposit of Byzantine commonware shards, including pieces of the shoulder of a late Roman amphora with Greek writing. In the northwest corner of the house is a 3-sided peristyle court. The courtyard is paved with rectangular basalt pavers and has a cistern. Typical of a space with significant domestic usage, we recovered 2 lower portions of hourglass grinding mills, other fragmentary grinding bowls and mortaria, 2 knives, a cylindrical mount of carved bone, and a small 2-headed flask. The peristyle house has a long tradition in the East, going back at least to the 4th century BCE. Nevertheless, the known distribution of the peristyle house in Palestine is quite limited. Yissar Hirschfeld lists 4 sites from late Roman and early Byzantine periods. At least 2 others have been subsequently published. A 3-sided peristyle is particularly characteristic of the evolution of the peristyle house in Roman North Africa, although the House of the Tragic Poet and the House of Sallust at Pompeii have three-sided peristyle courts. Simon Ellis has argued that the latest peristyle houses were constructed in the mid-6th century. Although we cannot yet date this structure with certainty, modifications to the house by the construction of the church to the west and its possible connection to this structure suggest a foundation in the 3rd or 4th century, which fits within Ellis's time frame. A small room occupies the northeast corner of the house. The original mosaic carpet is intact in many places. An inscription was discovered just south of a doorway in the north wall. We reconstruct the inscription to read, Eis elthe ep agatho, enter for good, or welcome. The inscription was to be read by persons entering through the doorway from the garden. Since the inscription is centered on the doorway, we identify the space as an entrance foyer for the house. To the north of the peristyle court and the foyer is a garden built on the declining slope of the mountain toward the wall of the city. Portions of 3 discernible areas have been excavated. The lowest area is in the west and is accessed by a staircase through a large doorway from the peristyle court. This lower section was a covered entrance porch, paved in opus sectile, bounded by 2 columns. To the north of the porch is a plastered fixture in the bulk. It seems to be a basin or small pool. In North Africa, many courts were filled with basins and pools. At times, fish were raised in such pools. 2 steps up to the east is another level. A single niche fountain sits in the northwest interior corner. The fountain is semicircular. The structure is composed of reused roof tiles and floor pieces that have been plastered. Toward the top of the fountain, a ceramic pipe provides water for the fountain. A mosaic floor proceeds north from the fountain and pool. The design of the floor is geometric and similar to other Byzantine floors at Hippos. After a typical border of bands of black and white, there is a galoche which runs north and south. An identical pattern follows the curve of the pool. The 2 galoche bands are woven together when they meet at the southern part of the floor. At the northerly end of Cardo 4 North, down several steps, is a formal entrance into the garden through a doorway with its lintel stone still intact. An inscription in tabula ansata was discovered inside, facing those entering through the threshold. The Greek is eutikos to kateste, good fortune to the builder. While removing destruction fill from the mosaic floor north of the fountain pool, we recovered a limestone block to which was attached a partial face of a woman. It is a fragmentary fresco of the Roman goddess Tyche. The fragment preserves the upper right portion of the face and the crown. The wide eyes look off to the left. The right eyebrow is prominent. The dark brown hair is pulled back toward the ears, perhaps with plaited braids. Fortifications of a city form the crown. The main gate consists of a Roman arch. The tops of the towers appear bulbous. The artistic style is realistic, suggesting 3rd or at least a 4th century composition. Tyche played an important role in the self-identification of Hippos. 4 of the 11 city coin types from Hippos involve a representation of Tyche, 2 of which make specific connection by including a horse, or little horse. Elsewhere in the project, an inscription was uncovered including the words Agathe Tyche, and of course she was invoked in the garden inscription just described. This peristyle house marks the beginning of the transitions illustrated by the excavations to date in the project. It reflects the Roman period, during which Hippos prospered and its elite built significant homes along several narrow streets east of the Roman basilica. In subsequent years, the peristyle house would undergo numerous modifications. A hall to the east of the peristyle court would be divided by a chorism wall. The entrance foyer would be closed and converted to industrial use. Constructions would be set upon the original surface of the peristyle court. Some doorways are blocked. The entrance to the garden from the street would be modified to provide a second source of water for the fountain. The dramatic descent to the garden from the peristyle court would be narrowed by door jambs and a door that locked from the garden side. A domestic space was built over the collapsed southeast corner. The Northeast Church. Illustrating the Byzantine period at Hippos is the Northeast Church, a small, nearly square church with a single exterior apse. With its side rooms to the north and south, it is of similar size to the house of Tyche to the east. The western portico of the Northeast Church was built over the line of one of the cardines that delineate the zones of the project. The street to the south is surfaced with basalt pavers and may have functioned as a via sacra for visitors to the venerated tombs in the church. Each aisle is separated from the nave by a narrow row of columns with irregular intercolumnation. There were 2 public entrances from the west and 1 from a north lateral chamber. Burials in the chancel are the most notable aspect of this architecturally marginal church. To the north of the central axis of the chancel is a masonry tomb. 3 basalt beams were in situ covering the western half of the tomb. The chamber of the masonry tomb is constructed of 4 courses of basalt ashlars. It is likely that the interior walls of the masonry tomb were decorated with frescoes. One larger piece of painted plaster shows 4 fingers of a near life-sized right hand. Outstretched hands feature prominently in the depictions of saints and in frescoes of Christian catacombs. Between the second and third beams, a lead pipe extends down into the tomb. The lead pipe is rolled, not melted. Its top was hammered into a funnel. A plaster mound held the funnel to the level of the floor. About 75 meters below the level of the stone floor is the limestone box of a sarcophagus covered by 6 flat stones. Notably, the box in the masonry tomb sits somewhat askew from level. The space between the bottom of the sarcophagus box and the floor of the masonry tomb is comparable in depth to Byzantine-led coffins. When the sarcophagus was removed, we could see that the sarcophagus had been placed on rough stones that lined the north, west, and south edges of the masonry chamber. Discoloration of the remaining soil indicates the outline of a decayed wooden box. 26 fragments of iron nails are supportive of this proposal, as is a lead corner bracket recovered from the fill. Human remains were found in both areas. The sarcophagus held the remains of at least 9 individuals, while the area of the coffin yielded 3 individuals. All the individuals found in these areas were adults, except for one infant, which was found in the sarcophagus and was represented only by teeth and pelvis fragments. As for the genders, the sarcophagus yielded the remains of at least 3 men and 3 women. The genders of the others could not be determined. At the south end of the chancel is a rectangular surface raised 16.5 centimeters above the floor. It's a single limestone slab that functions as a lid for the sarcophagus below it. The sides of the slab were revetted with marble. On the north face was an incised cross with an alpha and omega. A second cross was on the west revetment of the sarcophagus. The installation of the sarcophagus was contemporaneous with the building of the church and the laying of the original floor of the chancel. In a later phase, the sarcophagus was opened by breaking the western marble face and its cross. Plaster filled gaps left by broken pieces and leveled the top. A basin for holy oil was plastered over a hole bored into the lid. Extraction of relics seems to be a logical explanation, perhaps done out of economic necessity, as the subsequent repair was of poor quality. The sarcophagus contained the bones of a single small woman of 60-plus years. The bones were gathered under the anointing hole, long bones placed in a frame around the fragments of the skull, pelvis, and other smaller bones. In the earth at the east end of the sarcophagus were some 15 metatarsals and phalanges of the foot. While the sarcophagus was originally used for a burial, after it was opened, the remaining bones were arranged under the location of the anointing hole, except for the bones from the feet that were missed in the decompositional remains. There is a possible parallel for the burial at the Kyria Maria Church at Decapolis. The chapel was part of an urban monastic community. There are tombs in the northeast and southeast corners of the chancel. A mosaic inscription over the tomb at the east end of the south aisle reserves the tomb for Lady Mary, who founded this church. The burial in the northeast church at Hippos has the additional distinction of demarcating the tomb within the chancel, providing for ongoing veneration, and according a degree of anonymity appropriate for a foundress or abbess. In summary, the positioning of 2 tombs within the chancel of the northeast church would suggest that the church functioned as a memorial chapel and as a place for the invention of relics. The tomb of the elderly woman was the more prominent of the tombs and continued as a site of veneration even after regular ritual practice in the church had ceased. The masonry tomb in the center of the chancel was also contemporaneous with the laying of the first floor. It took on a second life as a family or community tomb when the sarcophagus was inserted over the original coffin. The nave of the church has a fragmentary mosaic floor, which was laid over the original floor, and separated by 3 to 4 centimeters of plaster. This second floor seems to have been entirely geometric in design. A square-in-square pattern is similar to the one observed in intercolumnar panel 2 at Kursi. The late 6th century date of the mosaics at Kursi suggests a similar date for the geometric floor of the northeast church. As Karen Britt has discussed, geometric compositions and uniform carpet patterns are part of a stylistic shift in the pavements. The compositional arrangement of 5th century mosaics displays a degree of spontaneity and liveliness that gave way to predictability and repetitiveness in the 6th century. The geometric patterns of the latter floor covered over the complexity and beauty of the first floor. Surviving from the first floor are a series of borders surrounded by 2 rows of 6 overlapping medallions. Only fragments of the medallions remain. The spaces between the medallions and the external border are filled with birds. Visible between easterly medallions are a duck with raised wings and a walking bird. Between the 2 southerly medallions, a head of another duck may be detected. These birds are similar to the birds adorning the floor of the Kyrie Maria Memorial Chapel in the monastery at Decapolis. Britt suggests that the birds affirm the commemorative function of a ritual space and, quote, should be interpreted as the blessed who take flight to heaven, end quote. The 2 southerly medallions are partially intact. The westerly medallion seems to be a feline creature, perhaps a young lion, as suggested by claws in the feet. The easterly animal has small hooves. It may be a gazelle or a ram. If the other medallions displayed similar animals, some calendric function may be implied. In the northeast corner of the north aisle, a section of mosaic floor is preserved. Next to the base of the chancel screen, in the center of the aisle, are 4 20-centimeter squares. The squares have a white field with equal armed crosses. To the north of the chancel is a chamber which we identify as a scuophylakion. Next to the passageway to the chancel are 2 flared crosses, some 35 centimeters in height. Crosses on mosaic floors are important due to the prohibition against their use after 427 CE by the Theodosian Code. However, crosses continue to appear in the mosaic floors into the 6th century. Ernst Kitzinger, in discussing the plain red crosses in the floor of the Martyrion of St. Babylas at Antioch, proposes that in early Christian times, crosses placed more or less conspicuously on or near entrances served primarily an apotropaic function. They denied access to the powers of evil. The appearance of crosses is in continuity with the apotropaic practice in other churches of the Lower Galilee. The placement of crosses near entrances to the church and sanctuary continues in the mosaics of this region. To the south of the domus, next to the chancel and the tomb of the elderly woman, is a large arched room that likely served as a diaconicon. 3 high benches were discovered next to the south, west, and north walls of this vaulted chamber. On the south wall, above the bench, is a rectangular niche in the wall. In the northeast corner of the diaconicon is a well-preserved cistern head. On the east cistern platform, in the northeast corner of the room, a small hoard of gold jewelry was discovered hidden under a fragment of a ceramic jar. The hoard included several belt elements and a magical amulet to address somatic diseases. the discovery of a healing charm in the Diaconicon indirectly raises the question of the function of the room in which the hoard was hidden. The room is oversized in comparison to the small size of the church. Its only entrance is immediately adjacent to the tomb of the elderly woman. The cistern in its northeast corner is in direct proximity to the tomb, prominently placed in the room, and at the same time is an unprecedented feature of a diaconicon. We suggest the room served a local healing cult that grew from the veneration of the elderly woman. In such a cult, the waters of the cistern would have been drawn for healing purposes. The discovery of the healing amulet, although pagan, supports this hypothesis. The Northeast Church is quite representative of the Byzantine period. Its mosaics show affinity with the practice in the Lower Galilee of this time, and its memorial tombs find significant parallels in churches in the region of the Decapolis. The church is one of at least 8 churches identified at Hippos. Probes beneath the floor levels of the complex consistently show ceramic assemblages dating no later than the 5th or early 6th centuries. The Northeast Church was most likely built during that time frame, but the church was clearly situated within the pre-existing street grid of the city. In so doing, it is a witness to the transitions through which Antiochia Hippos went during its history. The Northeast Church used one street as its western portico. It incorporated walls of a previous building, probably a house of similar design to the house of Tyche, and set some of its walls over foundations of earlier ones. To the north of the church, we have evidence of a 2-story structure. The apse of the church interrupted the small cardo to the east and intruded into the western wall of the peristyle house. But the intrusion into the west wall of the house of Tyche retained the southern jamb of a large doorway into the south portico of the peristyle. That door was subsequently narrowed in a fashion similar to the narrowing of doors in the Scuophylakeion. The retention of the doorway and its subsequent modification suggests incorporation of at least part of the house of Tyche into a larger monastic complex. While the particulars require further clarification, we hypothesize that this former housing area, northeast of the Roman Basilica, reached its fulfillment as a monastery. Paul Magdaleno has argued that, quote, many, if not most, urban and suburban churches and monasteries were converted le oikoi, end quote. The monastery, in more ways than one, was the alter ego of the secular oikos. Far from being a negation of the extended household, the religious foundation was the household's ultimate fulfillment. The foundation and the endowment of a family monastery was a sound economic investment, capable of bringing material as well as spiritual benefits to the founder and those of his or her descendants who inherited proprietary rights to the establishment. Hippos would be destroyed by a major earthquake in the mid-8th century CE, after which it was never reoccupied as a city. However, well prior to the earthquake, liturgical rites ceased in the Northeast Church. All doors to the domus were intentionally sealed, except the entrance to the south aisle that gave access to the tomb of the elderly woman. Burials stopped. Reliquaries were removed. A crude wall was built around the exposed sarcophagus of the woman. The church and its compound became little more than a mausoleum of sorts, and were abandoned well before the infamous earthquake. The Western building complexes. To the west of Cardo to north are a series of building complexes with eastern faces of 8 to 9 meters, and with spaces between those buildings of about 6 meters. They represent the third phase in the occupation of Hippos, the Umayyad period. The Alpha building sits on the northwest corner of the junction of Cardo to north and the Decapolis Maximus. It is a rectangular building with a paved plaza in the northeast corner. The complex consists of 4 rooms. The only known access to the building is via an L-shaped staircase from the plaza to the north. The easterly storage room is bounded on the west by a Corzine wall, with a doorway on the north end. The floor is extremely crude of randomly distributed flat stones. We propose that this area served as a storage room, as was supported by a high concentration of basin jar fragments. In the central room, there is a bench against the south wall, and 2 doorways to the rooms to the west. The northern doorway has its lintel stone in situ. The stone floor consists of irregular flagstones and is somewhat uneven. The southwest room also has a bench lining the south wall. There are 2 niches in the north wall of the room. The floor consists of tightly placed rectangular stones of irregular sizes. A watering bowl sits in the northeast corner of the room. 1 stone of the bench near the doorway has a hole drilled in it, perhaps for tying an animal. The northwest room also has 2 niches in the north wall. The east niche contained 2 nearly complete pots, dated to the late 7th or early 8th centuries. The northwest room is subdivided by a limestone wall constructed of a single row of blocks set on end. The surviving portions of the Alpha building complex likely served a storage function for whatever floor or floors stood above. The heavy basalt ashlars of the exterior walls suggest something substantive above, as does the presence of a staircase. The function of the building was likely utilitarian or even industrial, in view of its plain construction and the surrounding installations. In the northern section of the floor of the central room, there appears to be the remains of a stylobate running east to west. In the northwest room, we exposed a second stylobate running north to south. This stylobate likely formed a corner with the east to west stylobate in the central room. The outward face of the north to south stylobate is 4.1 meters from the line of the east face of the wall of the Roman Basilica. So we surmise that in the Roman period, a large public building likely stood in this location. Although the Alpha building complex witnesses the final stage of the history of Hippos, within it are indicators of the earlier Roman grandeur. Excavation of the space between the Alpha and Beta complexes revealed a paved surface spanning the distance between the 2 buildings. The plaza is constructed of basalt pavers, similar to those used in Cardo to north. A staircase sits atop the paved surface. 6 stairs remain. We speculate that about 4 more stairs completed the staircase to a height of some 2 meters. One who climbed the staircase would then turn south and walk over the structures below to the second story of the Alpha building. One paver of the plaza shows a worn inscription on its surface. It reads, "To good fortune, Agathae Tyche. Arius Heraclitus honors Terrius Titianus, our illustrious consularis." The paver was cut from a larger inscription, two other fragments of which have been discovered in different seasons, and they provide the reason for the honorific, as, quote, patron and builder of the fatherland. The former Greco-Roman culture is trod underfoot. In the southwest corner of the plaza is a crudely built small room. The paving of the plaza was removed to set the threshold walls and pedestals of this room. The room blocked access to the space between the two buildings and is characteristic of the Byzantine custom of creating low-status structures by subdividing disused spaces. The Beta building complex is an L-shaped structure that wraps around the northwest corner of the paved plaza just discussed. Its southern room is 1/2 meter below the paved plaza and is itself similarly paved with basalt pavers, upon which the northern wall is set, suggesting that an outdoor plaza was later enclosed. A double-sized doorway to the east gives access to the plaza, and a doorway to the north gives access to the northwest room, albeit at a higher elevation. The roof of the room was held up by a double arch with a central column and a capital used as a pilaster to the south. The arch used the north wall as its base because a third arch to the north supported the roof for that room. The northwest room in the complex is more poorly constructed and was abutted to the south room secondarily. The exterior faces are basalt ashlars with crude and sometimes undefined interiors. There was a second small doorway from the northwest room into the courtyard to the east. The floor of the northwest room is compressed earth. The northeast room is of similar construction. It has a single doorway in its southeast corner to a courtyard. Directly south is a crudely paved courtyard that was at least partially roofed. In the southeast corner is a makeshift limestone staircase which led to the roof, or a second story. This unremarkable structure probably served a domestic purpose and was utilitarian at best. Remarkable in the excavation of the rooms of the Beta complex was the relative paucity of ceramic finds. No restorable vessels were found. Some heavy stone bowls were pushed against a wall, and doorways were intentionally blocked. We conclude that the Beta complex was also abandoned prior to the earthquake of the mid-8th century. The westerly structures not only illustrate the extreme poverty of the Umayyad period, but they also mark a trend notable throughout the excavation area of the project. This quadrant of Hippos, located as close as it may be to the center of the city, was essentially abandoned well before the earthquake. Such would likely be true of much of the rest of the city. The glories of Antiochia Hippos were in the distant past. Conclusion. The 12 seasons of the Northeast Insula project have uncovered a microcosm of the transitions through which the city passed during its history, from Greco-Roman to Umayyad, from pagan to Christian, from wealth to poverty, from polis to abandonment. During its last years, Hippos did not benefit from its proximity to the Umayyad center of power in Damascus, and with the shift to Abbasid rule, no reconstruction followed. Hippos of the Decapolis was a memory at best until the arrival of the archaeologists.